A variety of modern horror stories have drawn elements of their villains and plots from historical folklore. Witch movies like The Witch, The Blair Witch Project, and the Fear Street trilogy have taken aspects from witchcraft folklore and historical events like the Salem witch trials. This even permeated children's movies, with movies like Hocus Pocus, Twitches, and Paranorman. Disease movies like 28 Days Later, Contagion, and World War Z saw roots in historical epidemics like the Black Plague. Even madness stories like The Shining, The Happening, and Jacob's Ladder stemmed from historical accounts of madness and mass hysteria, like the Dancing Plague of 1518 and the Meowing Nuns of 15th century France. One significant myth with an interesting historical and cultural background has appeared in a variety of films, books, and even video games, and that is Wendigo Psychosis. The Wendigo is a mythological creature that originated from Algonquian folklore. The Algonquian people mostly lived along the Atlantic coast in present-day Canada and the eastern United States. In Algonquian culture, the Wendigo exists as a warning of turning to cannibalism during starvation, with the greater interpretation of the dangers of overconsumption and greed. In a variety of cultures, cannibalism existed as a spiritual ritual. In some Native American cultures, cannibalism was seen as a way to consume enemy souls, and it had a cultural significance to their agricultural practices. The Wendigo itself was a malevolent spirit that possessed humans, specifically targeting those who had turned to cannibalism during winter starvation. The word Wendigo can mean many different things through cultures and spellings, like solely for self or winter cannibalism monster. The Algonquian word Winteko-wa translates to owl, a creature seen in some Native American cultures as a bad omen or a symbol of passing into the spirit world. It's important to note that Wendigo psychosis is a real disorder, whose name, though originated in Native American folklore, describes an entirely different, separate, and real phenomenon where people who have access to food are overtaken by the insatiable desire for human flesh. In most of its depictions, the Wendigo takes the form of an animalistic beast with an emancipated body and the head of a deer. Oral depictions of this creature passed down through Native American communities often depicted the Wendigo as a sort of skeletal creature with human traits mixed with animal traits like horns and claws. This depiction reveals a few key things about the interpretation of the Wendigo. Its large and looming physique cements it as a predatory animal. The description of a skeletal human-like body outlines the transformation from human into monster due to overwhelming greed for personal survival. And the deer antlers show a corruption of innocence. Deer are often a symbol of spirituality and transformation, seen by their antlers that constantly change, shed, and grow throughout their life cycle. This image has been cemented in pop culture as well. In Get Out, the movie starts with a seemingly normal couple hitting an innocent deer with their car, jump-starting the malevolent occurrences in the rest of the film at the Armitage's house.
Sir, can I see your license, please?
Wait, why?
Yeah, I have state ID.
No. He wasn't driving.
In Red Dead Redemption 2, the recurrence of the deer highlights the goodness of Arthur's character outside of his otherwise questionable violent choices.
You're a good man, Arthur Morgan. Good man.
Goodness gracious.
No! You can't shoot me. My wife is having a baby.
And possibly the most famous symbolism is shown in Bambi, with the end of his childhood innocence being marked by the murder of his mother.
We made it, Mother! Mother!
Although Wendigos contain this widely accepted appearance, their qualities and power sets can change depending on who is portraying them. This happened for a number of reasons. First, in many native cultures, a certain taboo surrounds making recreations of evil figures, which might be an explanation for the lack of surviving Algonquian art clearly depicting the Wendigo. Second, many of these tribes communicated stories of these legends orally, and as a result, the description of the creature can vary by location and be altered over time, like a game of telephone. And lastly, the Algonquian people were victims of oppression from the French, English, and American settlers, resulting in disease, land loss, and a disappearance of cultural practices and beliefs, making it increasingly difficult to pass down exact details of cultural legends. Throughout the 20th and 21st centuries, Wendigos have spread from oral cultural myths to pop culture media. A number of movies came out that featured the Wendigo as the primary antagonist. 1995's Frostbiter, Wrath of the Wendigo features a group of hunters unleashing the spirit of the Wendigo while interfering with sacred ruins. 2020's Antlers follows a middle school teacher and her brother who encounter the mythical creature. At the epicenter of the film is the relationship between the teacher and her student Lucas, who's struggling with trauma and neglect. The film explores the cyclical nature of trauma, which relates to the life and death and consumption and greed elements of the Wendigo's symbolism.
Is what was in the mine. It's the Wendigo. According to legend, during a brutally cold winter, a lost hunter's severe hunger drove him to cannibalism.
This is a myth you're talking about.
Well, for you, yeah. But a cautionary tale to the indigenous people who believe in it.
And 1999's Ravenous explored the Wendigo legend through the lens of 19th century war, with strong themes of survival and moral deterioration. An argument could even be made that zombie movies originated from the myth of the Wendigo. Both creatures are driven by insatiable hunger, both pose a direct threat to humanity, and the Wendigo curse and the zombie bite are both examples of the monsters being somewhat infectious.
Ellie. Ellie, your arm.
A number of books came out as well that capitalized on the fear surrounding the Wendigo. Tales like The Wendigo by Algernon Blackwood, a 1910 short story about a camping trip gone wrong, and 2019's Those Who Came Before by J.H. Moncrief, about a group of friends exploring a haunted property, both feature Wendigos. Arguably, though, the most recognizable one is Stephen King's 1983 novel Pet Sematary. This book's popularity warranted a film adaptation, and a sequel, and a remake of the original, and a prequel story. The original book follows Lewis Creed, a doctor who, upon moving into a new house with his family, discovers a burial ground. After Lewis's son Gage dies, he buries him in the cemetery and witnesses him be reborn as a violent creature. Lewis's neighbor Judd explains that the burial ground is linked to a malevolent entity called the Wendigo.
Well, sometimes that is better.
In this iteration, the Wendigo is not associated to the physical self-preservation of resorting to cannibalism during starvation, but rather with the metaphorical self-preservation of resorting to uprooting a dead loved one and allowing them to be reanimated during a time of grief and depression. The book ends on a rather ambiguous note. After Lewis's wife Rachel is killed by the evil spirit possessing their son Gage, Lewis buries Rachel in order to resurrect her. The Wendigo is not defeated, and the end of the book serves as a symbol of the cyclical nature of trauma. It basically presents a situation to any reader who has experienced great loss. If you could bring a dead one back to life, would they come back as themselves or something else? It highlights the necessity of coming to terms with death rather than facing the consequences of a life stuck in grief. And the development that I find the most interesting, Wendigos and Wendigo-inspired creatures have bled into video games. This medium allows the player to engage in an interactive experience with the creature. Seeking Evil, the Wendigo sees the player explore a North American forest cursed by the Wendigo from a first-person point of view. The Rusty Lake franchise doesn't contain any outright Wendigos, but there are a number of creatures that were potentially influenced by the myth. The corrupted soul in Case 23 has a human body and deer antlers. In this game, the corrupted soul is an amalgamation of all the bad memories in a person. This spirit constantly hungers for the soul and memories of the player. In Rusty Lake Roots, we're introduced to Albert Vanderboom, a character who's violent since childhood and desires to control and harm the members of his family. He wears a suit and a deer mask when he embarks on his journey for revenge. In the earliest chronological iteration of the deer-human hybrid in Rusty Lake Paradise, we have Nicholas Islander donning a deer mask while sacrificing his own child in order to achieve personal enlightenment. In every occurrence of a human deer-like figure in this franchise, there's a symbolic transformation into evil. The Wendigo itself is an embodiment of the transformation from human into monster due to greed. The fact that two of these characters in Rusty Lake are wearing deer masks represent the loss of identity and distortion of their original character into one driven by self-preservation alone. Honorable mention for the Wendigo in Fallout 76, and then the best one of the bunch, and the video game that introduced a lot of people to the legend of the Wendigo. Until Dawn, released in 2015, was basically Supermassive Games' magnum opus. It featured engaging lore, a branching story structure that influenced future games, personalized characters, and extremely impressive graphics for the time it was released.
It was just a prank, Han.
The game follows a group of friends at a remote lodge on Blackwood Mountain as they pull a prank on their friend Hannah that leads to her running into the woods, followed by her sister Beth, where they fall off a cliff to their deaths. A year later, the rest of the group reunites at the cabin and is terrorized by three villains: the Psycho, the Red Herring, and the Wendigo. If you're good at the game, the Wendigo is cemented as a terrifying villain through its appearance and capabilities. If you're bad at the game, it reaches this fear status through its ability to murder nearly all of the characters in uniquely gruesome ways. The potential of the Wendigo as a horror creature is met and exceeded in this game through its appearance, lore, the gameplay, and its skills. It's tall and threatening, resembles a human in an uncanny valley kind of way, and its animalistic behavior and exaggerated movements immediately incite fear in the characters, and more importantly, the players. This game works hard to slowly introduce pieces of the Wendigo's lore throughout the game. We learn that the Wendigo curse began in 1952 when workers trapped in mines during the winter resorted to cannibalism, thus beginning the possession and transformation into Wendigos.
The mountain don't belong to me, it's true, but it don't belong to the Washingtons. This mountain belongs to the Wendigo. There is a curse that dwells in these mountains. Should any man or woman resort to cannibalism in these woods, the spirit of the Wendigo shall be unleashed.
The story culminates with the reveal that Hannah didn't die when she fell off the cliff, but survived, then ate her sister in a moment of desperation, transforming her into one of the Wendigos that the group battles. The game also makes great use of its gameplay. The Don't Breathe mechanic, which forces the player to hold the remote completely still, intensifies scary moments and adds to the interactivity of the game. And the game pretty masterfully translates parts of the Wendigo's skill set into chilling horror moments. For example, one trait of Wendigos in mythology is their ability to lure victims by imitating voices. In the game, the Wendigo mimics the voices of other characters, adding to the eerie atmosphere while simultaneously playing mind games with the player. Honestly, this leads even further back to their lore when you think about it. There's a moment where Ashley is in the mines, and she thinks she hears Jessica calling for help.
Who's there? Anybody? Jessica!
If you choose not to help her, she continues about her exploration. But if you stop and investigate to help Jessica, a Wendigo literally rips Ashley's head off. This relates to the whole nature of the Wendigo being built around self-preservation and greed. It's clear that the creators put a lot of work into making the characters in this game multi-dimensional people in a story that subverts a lot of classic horror expectations.
We're familiar with how slasher movies work. Most people have seen some horror movies, and we have established notions and preconceptions about the roles of the players in horror movies.
One of the things that Larry does really well is make these multi-layered characters, and I think for just the story in general, it follows the quintessential horror film plot lines, but the characters are so unique in themselves.
Yeah, so I think what was fun was we take some sort of stock characters and we try to give them some shape, but at least at the beginning they're recognizable in the way of groups of friends. There's, the jock and the bitchy girl.
Please, just try to understand. Understand the palm of my hand, bitch.
People's interest in the Wendigo likely stems from the obsession with mystery and true crime. Horror movies like Green Inferno and true crime stories involving cannibals like Jeffrey Dahmer and Armin Muse gained popularity because of the intrigue of the psychology of crime.
Why are people so fascinated by murder and by serial killers?
So I think that the reason that I love it and the reason that people enjoy watching it isn't because they're voyeurs who want to think about the dark side of life. It's that they feel it is such a stretch to imagine that kind of behavior existing in a human being that they're fascinated to understand it.
These stories are all an analysis of morality. It's the same conceit for the Wendigo. It's interesting to see an interpretation of what we could turn into if we sacrifice the empathetic part of ourselves for survival. There's a reason that the story of the Donner Party has remained culturally relevant for almost 2 centuries. People are obsessed with tragic drama, the mystery, and the ability to theorize on where our moral compass would point if we were in a similar situation. It makes sense why this centuries-old Algonquian legend turned into a 20th century icon. The intriguing history and unique symptoms position it as a perfect jumping-off point for creative horror storytelling. It's a supernatural entity that has deep lore. It can mimic human voices, it lives in the woods relying on its strong hunting instincts, and it has nearly unbeatable powers of strength, speed, and survival. People undergoing the transformation into a Wendigo begin to physically transform. They can face hallucinations and experience a hunger for human flesh. You can't really ask for a horror villain with better potential for interesting storytelling and fear incitement.
What the fuck is going on around here?
Overall, the history of the Wendigo tells an interesting cautionary tale rooted in cultural beliefs that has grown to resonate with modern horror audiences. Like many other forms of pop culture iconography, its presentation in current media has been altered to fit each storyteller's specific vision. The Wendigos in Pet Sematary are a definitively malevolent figure, whereas the Wendigos in Until Dawn evoke feelings of empathy and pity because of our ability to see their human backstory and the knowledge that their transformation came from performing a cannibalistic act in a moment of starvation and desperation.
I'm sorry, Beth. I have no choice. It's the only way I can survive anymore. If someone finds this, I'm sorry.
Legends and myths are often used as a way to anthropomorphize abstract moral themes. The 19th century was a time of scientific advancement, and the development of new ideas always comes with a paired development of new fears. Mary Shelley molds this abstract fear into the characterization of the creature in Frankenstein. In children's stories, characters like the Big Bad Wolf and the Pied Piper are symbols of the dangers of naivety. Even in the widest sense, we have anthropomorphized gods and goddesses in mythology to symbolize power, beauty, and cunning. It's easier to digest these abstract values when they're presented in forms that relate to their character. For the Wendigo, this means depicting it as an emaciated, almost skeletal figure to draw attention to its roots in starvation, and giving it a deer head to depict the loss of innocence and the transformation from human into monster. The Wendigo continues to captivate and terrify audiences in modern horror projects, serving as a powerful metaphor for consistent self-preservation and the spectrum of human morality.